The morning sun cast a soft glow over Atlanta, painting the skyline in hues of orange and pink as Sarah Collins awoke to the familiar buzz of her alarm at 6:30 a.m. The vibrant city was just beginning to stir, but Sarah was already busy preparing for her day. While she was scheduled to be in the courtroom at 9 a.m. as an esteemed assistant United States attorney, years of experience had instilled in her the importance of early preparation. Her chic downtown apartment was a reflection of her meticulous nature. Case files organized on her desk, her tailored courtroom attire carefully curated and hung up, ready for the day ahead. Yet today was different. Rather than facing the usual array of serious criminal cases, Sarah needed to resolve a personal issue. A parking ticket she believed had been unjustly issued. She opted for a more casual look, donning a sophisticated navy blue blazer paired with a crisp white blouse and sleek black trousers. Standing before her bathroom mirror, Sarah appreciated how her natural curls framed her determined expression. At 35, she felt proud of the decision to embrace her authentic self by allowing her hair to reflect her heritage after years of straightening it. After a quick breakfast consisting of a banana and a thermos filled with piping hot coffee, she stepped into her sleek Mercedes. It was a recent acquisition, one she had gifted herself for successfully prosecuting a high-profile corruption case. There was a sense of pride as she navigated the morning traffic, despite the occasional curious glance from pedestrians at a young black woman driving such a luxurious car. As she turned on NPR, the news broadcast filtered through the car speakers, though her mind wandered back to her documentation of the parking ticket dispute. Reviewal of the contradictory signs leading to her receipt. At 8:15 a.m., just as she began to feel comfortable in her routine, her car's Bluetooth announced an incoming call. The name on the screen made her heart race. It was her boss, the U.S. Attorney himself. "Sarah," he began, his usually composed tone laced with urgency. "We have a critical situation with the Thompson trafficking case." The Thompson case was one of the most significant human trafficking prosecutions in the Southern District of Georgia. Its stakes were too high for Sarah to ignore. "What's the timeline?" she queried, both anxious and determined. As her boss explained the last-minute defense motion that could jeopardize their case, she felt the heavy weight of responsibility anchor her in her seat. They had until noon to respond. Her plans for a simple court appearance quickly faded. Analyzing complex legal arguments took precedence. Finding a nearby coffee shop, she parked her car and pulled out her laptop, using her phone as a hotspot to connect. Absorbed in the documents, she felt time slipping away faster than expected. By the time she glanced at her watch again, it was 8:50 a.m. The brisk walk to the municipal court was at least 10 minutes away, and finding parking would undoubtedly add to that tardiness. Panicked, she quickly called her boss, promising to provide a thorough analysis after her appearance, while simultaneously reminding herself of the gravity of the case. As heavy traffic held her up, her mind spun with the thought that being late to court was against everything she stood for as a prosecutor. It was 9:10 a.m. when she entered the courthouse, papers clutched tightly in her hands, and her heart sank at the thought of repercussions for her lateness. Judge William Barrett's courtroom had a reputation for strict adherence to rules and an unforgiving atmosphere. The 62-year-old judge, clad in his traditional black robe, surveyed the court with a glint of authority developed over 3 decades on the bench. As the session commenced, he observed the early attendees, mostly white and neatly dressed, all appearing organized, a prelude he appreciated. As the clock approached 9:15 a.m., Sarah slipped into the courtroom discreetly, trying not to attract attention. But the moment she crossed the threshold, Judge Barrett shot her a reprimanding glare, halting the current case mid-sentence. "Step forward," he commanded, his voice echoing, icy and authoritative. "Do you think your time is more valuable than the court's, Miss Collins?" He questioned sharply, rhetorical as Sarah approached the stand, her heart racing. This was not how she had envisioned her morning. His face displayed disdain as he continued, very aware that he was making an example of her, generating discomfort around the court. Sarah maintained her composure, observing the courtroom dynamic unfold. The subtle glances exchanged between defendants, a young white woman sitting nearby who'd arrived late and remained invisible to the judge's judgment. Though she wished to speak, she felt the conflicting tides of injustice playing out before her. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady despite the tension. "If I may explain." "You may not," Judge Barrett interrupted, dismissing her with a wave of his hand as he began lecturing on the importance of punctuality. His words, stinging and laden with contempt, fell heavily in the room, emphasizing a narrative of authority and disrespect. The atmosphere shifted as Sarah's resolve solidified. She could feel eyes on her, some sympathetic, others wary of the potential backlash of challenging the judge. The elderly man beside her, James Wilson, watched with a knowing gaze. He had seen similar outbursts before. "I cannot accept this," Sarah thought to herself. The tension coiled tightly in the air, building toward inevitable confrontation. This was no ordinary parking ticket dispute anymore. It was a manifestation of enduring systemic prejudice alive and well in the heart of the justice system. But, just as she prepared to respond, Judge Barrett seized upon the situation, announcing a fine of $500 for contempt, one of the highest he'd dished out this year. Hammering his gavel to punctuate his verdict, the words hung in the air, causing murmurs of disbelief among the other defendants. "I will pay if I must," Sarah thought, though bitterness brewed within. This was more than just a penalty for being slightly late. It was further entrenching, an unintended narrative suggesting that her color and perceived status warranted harsher treatment. She felt his eyes casting judgment, never truly connecting with her as a person before him. "Do you understand the fine?" he inquired, fully anticipating a meek assent. But in that moment, she knew this was a pivotal choice, between compliance and fighting for what was just. "Yes, Your Honor, I understand," she replied coldly, internally marking his biases, every nuance illuminated by the harsh courtroom lights. But she wasn't finished. The judge, oblivious to the weight of his own actions, turned to the next folder, attempting to brush aside this entire episode as if it were a mere inconvenience. Then, Sarah seized the moment. "Your Honor," she declared, projecting newfound strength, "I would like to formally introduce myself for the record." She reached into her bag and pulled out her DOJ credentials, holding them high for all to see, the golden seal catching the light. Gasps pierced the courtroom air as every eye turned her way once more. For the first time, Judge Barrett fully regarded Sarah Collins as more than just a late defendant. "I am Assistant United States Attorney Sarah Collins, serving in the Northern District of Georgia," she stated with authority that was undeniable. Shock and disbelief were reflected across faces in the courtroom. The elderly black man beside her finally allowed himself a small smile, recognizing the moment for its historical value. "I apologize for my tardiness," Sarah continued, letting her voice echo. "I was delayed due to an urgent federal case. I believe you're aware of the Thompson trafficking prosecution, which has garnered quite a bit of public attention." A beat passed, allowing her words to settle in. Judge Barrett's expression shifted rapidly, the color fading as he grasped the implications. "Had I known your position," he began, but Sarah interjected. "Your Honor," she asserted clearly, "my position should not determine your judgment. What matters is equal treatment under the law." Around the courtroom, the tension unfurled and transformed into a wave of solidarity, murmuring rippling through the benches as she spoke of systemic bias. Mrs. Thompson began typing fervently, catching every syllable, as she laid down her observations of the earlier cases and the disparate treatment she'd witnessed. Judge Barrett struggled to maintain control, shuffling papers nervously in an effort to reinstate his authority. "I propose immediate action," she stated clearly, her voice steady and unwavering. "First, I will pay the fine as documented evidence. Second, I request a review of the last 6 months of contempt charges concerning demographic patterns. And lastly, I suggest mandatory bias training for all personnel in this courtroom." The murmurs shifted to astonished silence. For the first time that morning, Judge Barrett felt the ground underneath his authority crumbling. his face betraying the remnants of his previous assurance. "Your Honor?" Sarah pressed on. "What is extreme is not the bias training or the review of records, but the pattern of inequity inherent in our justice system." With poise, she detailed the disparities, her points made with the calm assurance of someone firmly grounded in truth. "I've sent a documented report to my office already. As an officer of the federal court, it is my duty to pursue any patterns of injustice." Her voice rang with determination, making it evident to everyone in the room that this was burgeoning into something far bigger than herself, or a mere parking ticket. She stepped further into this transformative moment, drawing from her reservoir of knowledge and experience. Sarah was not just challenging a judge. She represented every individual who had been wronged, every voice that felt silenced under the weight of discrimination. Let today mark a turning point, where we seek not just to punish the actions of Judge Barrett, but to acknowledge and eradicate systemic bias. Justice is not simply about enforcing laws. It's about how we treat those who step into our courtrooms. The silence in the court was deafening, and time felt suspended in that moment. James Wilson watched with a sense of pride swelling in his chest, knowing history was being made right before their eyes. Finally realizing the gravity of this encounter, Judge Barrett glanced around the room, his unease palpable. "Perhaps we could discuss this further in chambers," he stumbled, searching for a way to restore his authority post-haste. "No, Your Honor," Sarah replied firmly. "This moment needs to be recognized. It's crucial that the public sees the disparities we're tackling. The issue runs deeper than today alone. It's woven into the fabric of our justice system." In the weeks that followed her courtroom revelation, news of Sarah's bold stand reverberated throughout the legal community. As her message spread, it sparked conversations on bias that often went unaddressed. Lawyers began to come forward, sharing their experiences of injustices in courtrooms, emboldened by Sarah's actions. Local news outlets began covering a story that unraveled into a larger discourse surrounding institutional bias, with hashtags like "No Judge Barrett" and "No Justice in Color" gaining momentum on social media platforms. The public began sharing their stories, forging a collective narrative aimed towards change. Meanwhile, Sarah continued her work at the federal office, analyzing cases in the Thompson trafficking trial, but also reviewing newly reported patterns of bias she had learned from her private conversations with attorneys across the city. The need for systemic reform was echoed in every message, every discussion she had, fueling her resolve to advocate for those affected. The courthouse, too, was in flux. Mrs. Thompson, once a mere observer in the system, saw the opportunity that a newly installed court monitoring program presented. She became a leading advocate for documenting bias, collecting evidence, and ensuring court proceedings reflected equity in practice. 3 months passed, and the fallout from that fateful courtroom day began to bloom like a flower breaking through concrete. Sarah received invitations to speak at various events, captaining discussions that ranged from civil rights to judicial accountability. The changes were transformative on scales larger than she initially imagined. Sarah wanted accountability, and accountability was what she demanded. Formulating a strategy for how justice systems could hold their judges accountable, while also investing in training that would allow them to understand systemic biases more clearly. In a special session set up for judges, Sarah spoke candidly. Change isn't easy, and it requires humility. It requires patience and willingness to listen. As she articulated the paths toward education for all court officials, her voice resonated powerfully through the chamber, leaving an indelible mark on her audience. Simultaneously, investigations unfolded as the Judicial Review Board began scrutinizing the patterns Sarah had pointed out within Judge Barrett's court and beyond. Evidence of significant disparities began surfacing, confirming long-standing suspicions within the ranks of lawyers who had been gathering their own data, yearning for an opportunity to act. Months turned into years, and as Sarah's advocacy blossomed, legislative reforms rolled out across courthouses and states. Mandatory bias training for all court personnel, regular auditing of judicial decisions, the establishment of community oversight committees, and new guidelines that ensured standardized enforcement of sentences and fines. One quiet morning, nearly 6 months after Sarah's stand in the courtroom, she received a letter from a young law student. The student shared the impact Sarah had on her decision to pursue civil rights law. Seeing you stand up for what was right in Judge Barrett's courtroom gave me hope. Hope for myself. Hope for those I want to represent. Thank you for being an inspiration. This reflection prompted Sarah to launch a legal clinic tailored to supporting victims of discrimination and bias. All the while, the elderly black man from that fateful day returned to witness the changes unfolding in the courthouse he had frequented for decades. Today feels different, he commented, breathless from the transformation that echoed through the halls. It's the first time I see people treated fairly, without fear of judgment. As the sun set behind the skyline in Atlanta, the city buzzed with optimism, a testament to a courageous effort to enact change. Sarah stood as a beacon of resilience, embodying the hope that one voice could indeed alter the course of justice and equity. A new plaque surrounded by its gallery would greet visitors entering the courthouse, reading, "Justice is not simply about the law. It is about treating every individual with dignity." And beneath those words, the date reflected the morning Sarah Collins walked boldly into Judge Barrett's courtroom and ignited a ripple effect poised to reshape the justice system for generations to come. In a world that too often silenced cries for equity, Sarah's moment of defiance became a catalyst for reevaluating the very foundation of judicial fairness. And as she too often reminded herself, one stand for what is right could lead to unprecedented change in a world yearning for justice. Thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed this story and found it thought-provoking, don't forget to give us a thumbs up. Your likes help us reach more people and share important narratives about justice and equality. We want to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think about Sarah's journey? Have you ever experienced or witnessed bias in the justice system? Let's create a dialogue and support one another in these important discussions. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that inspire change and highlight the struggles for justice in our society. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for being part of our community. Together, let's continue to advocate for equality and justice for all. Until next time, take care and keep standing up for what's right.